From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is U.S. Farm Report.
Welcome to U.S. Farm Report this weekend. Well, after 6 weeks on the road, we're finally back in our Kansas City studios. And here's what's in store over the next 60 minutes. USDA rolling out a bullish grain stocks report Monday, but can the momentum last? World Dairy Expo taking place in Wisconsin this week.
USMCA still needs to be ratified. Will the deal, which will boost U.S. dairy farmers, become completed and soon? We talk with dairy experts here at World Dairy Expo.
As the market reaction starts to sizzle out from a major plant fire in Kansas,
there's been lots of emotion and lots of adjustment in the market.
Some cattle producers are calling for major change. And in John's world,
how many pigs in China? Good question.
U.S. Farm Report is presented by the Chevy Silverado and the all-new Silverado HD, the strongest, most advanced family of Silverados ever.
Well, the market's taking off earlier this week after the release of the latest grain stocks reports. USDA pegs the old corn crop at more than 2 billion bushels. That's down 1% from a year ago. Still a high number of those bushels are stored on farms. USDA estimates at 753 million. That's 22% higher than a year ago.
That's a 300 million bushel difference in the pre-trade guess versus what was actually printed here. The reason for the drop is yet to be determined. It's either a lighter 2018 crop, which is the most possible thing here, I think, or it was better than expected usage.
And checking on soybeans, they totaled 913 million bushels. That's up a whopping 108% from this time last year. The amount stored on farms is 265 million bushels, up 162%. Most held off farm at 648 million bushels, up 92%. Now checking out the wheat crop, it totals more than 2 billion bushels, down just slightly from a year ago. On-farm stocks are 776 million bushels, up 23%. Off-farm at more than 1.5 billion bushels, down 8%. The quarterly Hogs and Pigs report is also out from USDA, and it's breaking all kinds of records. It reports the U.S. hog inventory is up 3%. That's the highest September 1st inventory of all hogs and pigs since the estimates started in 1988. Inventory now stands at 77.7 million head, and breeding inventory is at more than 6 million head. That's up 2% from a year ago and up slightly from last quarter. Now, marketing high inventory is pegged at more than 71 million head. That's up 4% from last year, and it's another record breaker, the highest market hog inventory since the estimates began. Now, if you look at just the June to August pig crop, it stands at more than 35 million head, up 3% from last year. Again, the largest June to August pig crop on record. And despite Washington seeing some turmoil, progress continues on the new U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement. Our Washington correspondent Jim Wiesmeyer reporting that odds are rising that Congress will vote yet this year on the agreement. House Ways and Means Chairman Richard Neal also leads a group of Democrats working on key concerns about the agreement with the Trump administration. He, his staff, and U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer will be working through the 2-week recess on the latest proposals of ratification. Well, USMCA also a hot button issue at World Dairy Expo in Madison, Wisconsin this week. Betsy Gibbon joins us now with the buzz at World Dairy.
Tyne, it's been 1 year since USMCA was announced between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. And as the end of the year nears, many in the U.S. dairy industry wonder whether it will be ratified.
The one thing that we have working for us is I do think that the Democratic leadership wants to show that there can be business as usual on other issues besides whatever happens with the impeachment process. So we really are crossing our fingers that the impeachment process doesn't derail a vote on USMCA, because if it does and we get the process pushed back into 2020, then we'll have the election possibly impeding further action on the USMCA.
I would say my optimism that I had has been slightly reduced the last couple of weeks, to be honest. You know, once we run up against the election calendar, really, the chances of anything happening of substance, whether it's trade-related or otherwise, those grow less and less.
Ag Secretary Sonny Perdue spoke at World Dairy Expo, and he said he expects USMCA to pass once it hits the floor. He says he hopes Congress can focus on trade deals and not recent distractions happening in Washington as well. Reporting at World Dairy Expo, I'm Betsy Gibbon.
Well, a new study is sparking a push for changes to the federal milk marketing orders. American Farm Bureau Federation is proposing changes to the federal marketing order system, changes they say will both modernize the system and make it more responsive to dairy farmers' needs. Now, according to our partners at Dairy Herd Management, AFBF is proposing that milk price discovery methods be expanded, including the elimination of block voting provisions. Some of these revisions being proposed could be big, as it's been 20 years since federal orders have undergone major changes. The proposal by AFBF is 16 pages long. Well, a new Farm Journal Pulse poll shows that despite the controversy surrounding the president, he still is seeing a lot of support in farm country, and that support is growing. More than 1,000 people were asked, do you approve or disapprove of the way Donald Trump is handling his job as president? 76% of people asked say they either strongly approve or somewhat approve. In August, that number was 71%. In July, it was 79%. Well, the president also releasing an update to his biofuels policy, including a way to reallocate those waived ethanol gallons. Under the plan, there would be an unspecified increase in the amount of ethanol oil refiners would have to blend starting next year. The EPA putting the issue up for public comment, but Washington correspondent Jim Wiesmeyer says the EPA will calculate the new blending volume requirements based on the amounts waived over the previous 3 years. Now, once the rules are finalized, EPA says it will ensure that more than 15 billion gallons of ethanol are blended. The EPA went on to say the plan will include relief expected to be provided in small refineries. It hopes to finalize the rule later this year. Now, renewable fuels groups calling the biofuels deal a win for restoring ethanol demand, while critics think it could open the door to even more small refinery waivers. That's it for the news. Well, this fall is starting to feel a lot like spring for some as rain, and some snow is keeping farmers out of the field. But could October turn drier? We'll have a check of weather next. Meteorologist Mike Hoffman joins us now with weather. Mike, the West saw record snowfall. The middle of the country seen relentless rains, and the South seen record heat. This crazy weather year, just will not end.
Well, yeah, that's right, Tyne. That's what makes it fun to be a meteorologist, but also very frustrating at the same time. I will say this, the pattern is changing. It's going to be in flux, though, over the next week, which means it may go back and forth in places, but a lot of folks are going to see some changes in what you have been seeing. We've already seen that across the upper Midwest, Great Lakes and the Northeast, and we have another trough moving across those areas, as you can see right there. That, as we head into this week, weakens as it moves through the Northeast. Another brief little ridge tries to form over the Great Lakes. The Southeast will still be warm, but not as warm. And then we see another trough coming in to the west. That moves eastward as well. That looks like a pretty decent storm for the middle of the country, Mississippi Valley, by the end of next week. And that will move east from there as well. So we haven't been seeing these troughs moving like this over the past several weeks. We've just seen the big ridge over the southeast kind of holding everything still. So there are some changes, no question, coming, and they've already begun in many places. Root zone moisture, you can see from the Great Lakes down into western Missouri, eastern Kansas, very, very wet. Very wet, North Dakota, eastern Montana, northern Wyoming. Unfortunately, the southeast, the opposite problem, and it's been a developing drought, as you're going to see, but very dry conditions in the root zone from Maryland all the way southward into southeastern Alabama, much of Georgia and the Carolinas. Pockets of dryness you can see from Texas into parts of the Southwest. Now you go to the drought monitor, and they've been kind of calling this a flash drought. It's come on suddenly, and it really has, just over the last 3 or 4 weeks. Kentucky especially, down into the Tennessee Valley. We've been seeing the dryness in the southeast in pockets, but now it's starting to spread out. Texas has gotten a little worse in places. Other places you've actually improved over the last 4 weeks, and it remains dry in parts of the Southwest. Well, let's go day by day. On Monday, cold front up and down the East Coast, just scattered showers and thunderstorms. Weak front over the Great Lakes. Next system diving into the Pacific Northwest. By Wednesday, that one's coming into the northern plains. Snow on the backside. Showers ahead of it, stationary front in the southeast with scattered showers and thunderstorms, and that's a pretty strong storm By Friday, over the Great Lakes, cold front to the south with showers and thunderstorms, a little bit of snow on the western fringe. Otherwise, it's mainly dry across the country. 30-day outlook for temperatures from Minnesota to the northwest, below normal. Texas to the southeast, above normal. Precipitation, unfortunately, still below normal from Texas through most of the southeast all the way up to the Ohio River. From the Great Lakes across the northern plains down into eastern New Mexico, above normal, and looks below normal from Utah right to the west coast. Tyne?
Well, a surprising twist to the grain stocks plot this week after a report gave some momentum to the markets. Well, Brian Bastine and Alan Brugler join me to talk about what it means for the weeks and even months ahead. That's next.
Hey y'all, Justin Moore here. Get ready to kick up some dust with the Roxor Dirt Roads and a Country Show sweepstakes. Enter now for a chance to win a customized off-road Roxor and 2 VIP tickets to one of my upcoming concerts. Visit roxoroffroad.com/Justin Moore.
Here now with our marketing roundtable guests, we have Alan Brugler, Brugler Marketing, as well as Brian Bastine of Advanced Trading. When we look at the markets today, let's start off with the bullish reaction we got from a grain stocks report that was really unexpected to start the week. Brian, gave this market some momentum.
It certainly gave the markets a shot in the arm, if you will, Tyne. Very surprisingly low corn number and a surprisingly low bean number too. The implication confirmed for soybeans was a lower than expected 2018 harvest. Now the USDA does not tweak the corn harvest in this report, but down the road they may adjust that. But taking the number at face value implied near record June, July, August corn feeding residual.
Yeah, and it showed we still have a lot of grain on farm storage, right? I mean, we saw high numbers with that. But I have a lot of farmers texted me, Alan, asking, how long can this last? How long will this market trend higher? Really, anyone knows at this point, but what fundamentals are at play now that we have an updated look at stocks?
Well, we're not going to get as much of a pop out of harvest delays as you might think, because we do have 2.1 billion bushels of old crop corn that are still in the bin, and they're still coming out. I'm getting calls every day, farmers with a little bit of old crop. Do I sell it yet? Do I keep it? 392 was the easy target. That was the chart gap on the December futures. We closed that this week. You've got some more resistance between $4 and $4.11. I think that'll slow us down for now, unless, of course, we get some kind of a major freeze event.
Yeah, so frost, freeze, those two versus each other, does it matter as we get later in the season? I mean, if we had a hard freeze or just a minor frost, does that matter at this point?
As you move further and further ahead, Tyne, it becomes less important. However, we recognize that you have viewers all across the country who planted very late this year, and for some of those viewers, it still does matter. And I would say at least for a couple more weeks, it could be a market mover.
Yeah, what do you think? Still a market mover?
Yeah, it's you need to get to dent. Most of the crop has made it to dent stage. There's still a little bit that hasn't, but when you get to half milk, your yield losses from the freeze go down. Frost doesn't hurt corn that much. You do lose some dry down capacity, but we still only have half the crop at black layer, which is mature.
Well, you know, some of the yield forecasts that we've seen this year, we're kind of banking on a frost or a freeze just because of how late this crop is, yet we had some really nice heat that helped progress this crop along. So when you look at the heat that we have, does that help or does that hurt our national yield that we possibly could see out of USDA?
I've heard arguments on both sides. I would say that definitely it avoided some early freeze, frost, damage potential, but it did push the crop along, for lack of a better phrase, and some people are saying that when you push your crop along a little bit too quickly, like we did with that historic heat in September, you do lose some yield potential, particularly in corn.
What do you think, Alan? I mean, do you think we still have too hefty of a yield from USDA, or do you think maybe they may be more right than we thought?
I think USDA eventually come down a little further, particularly in parts of Ohio and Indiana. We had a combination of heat and no rain for almost 30 days. And the crop had shallow roots because of the early wet situation. So we think the yield's probably somewhere between 164 and 165 rather than where USDA is at.
What about harvested acres? I mean, do you think we still see USDA trim quite a bit off of the harvested acreage number?
It's certainly a possibility. There's some historic precedent for changing the harvested acreage in the October report. And if you go back and look at, there have been years where we've changed that number fairly significantly, 500,000, 1.5 million acres. This is the year that could fall in that category. So you got two different variables we want to watch for that October 10th report. We want to watch yield and harvested acreage.
But even if we do see a reduction in yield and we do see a reduction in harvested acres, we can't ignore the fact that corn demand kind of stinks right now.
Export sales are pretty slow. The market's basically saying that this is too high of a price. And we have to remember we are above where we were a year ago for both corn and soybeans. World market is shipping corn rather rapidly from Brazil right now, 6.5 million tons last month. That pile will start to go down as we get into November, and the U.S. sales will pick up. But again, we're not cheap enough to really get that demand back.
Are we a residual supplier of corn right now, Brian?
Yes, for the moment. And I think that as Alan said, until that supply is exhausted, if you will, in South America, it's just cheaper for a buyer to source their corn from South America. And the other competitor now that's going to come into the mix shortly is Ukraine. It looks like they've got another stellar crop in Ukraine. So for the time being, U.S. is the residual supplier of corn.
Well, we are seeing some soybean demand creep up. How does that kind of change the price picture for soybeans, as well as pork prices have been a little bit better? We'll get into that with Alan later on U.S. Farm Report.
U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by the Enlist Weed Control System. More weed control, less drift and volatility, maximum yield potential.
Well, we talked about it briefly last week at Purdue University with Jason Lusk, but as ASF continues to spread, just how many hogs have been wiped out in China? Well, it's not an easy answer, as John Phipps explains in this week's John's World.
You know, it sounds like the beginning of a dad joke. How do you count all the pigs in China? However, the wild estimates of how badly ASF, Asian swine fever, has decimated the Chinese herd is a crucially important subject for our own hog and feed grain industries. I don't think we'll ever have accurate hog population information, since we never really have had before from China, and for good reasons. In March, the hog population there was said to be 375 million, or 428 million according to another article, about half of which are on tiny farms with 1 to 4 pigs each. At best, to count the number of hogs in China would require contacting anywhere from hundreds of thousands to 40 million farmers. So virtually all estimates of Chinese herd size is done by back calculating from pork production after slaughter. These estimates vary wildly, with Rabobank guessing half the breeding herd has been lost to disease. And as you can see, other guesses are all over the board. Oddly though, it's hard to correlate the dismal prediction of these losses with feed consumption. Here's a graph showing Chinese soybean imports over the last few years from all countries. The best information I can get is total imports are down about 9% year over year. That hardly matches up with the incredible losses of pigs in the headlines. There are complicating factors trying to match them up. The losses are often in the breeding herd, so pig numbers could lag. But then pigs have a pretty rapid reproduction rate, with 2 litters of 10 pigs per year possible. Retail sales of pork give a clue, but I would bet real young stores are taking advantage of the ASF publicity to pad margins as well. Since many of the pigs are slaughtered on farm, I'm not sure how they add that in either, or whether farmers are taking a hint from soaring pork prices to market directly consumers under the table. It has been known to happen. Expecting precise enumeration of 400-some million hogs in China is implausible. Estimates given out by ag industries observers may have some value, but there is no way to validate their guesses. And the most outlandish guess will get the most coverage. Maybe it really is a dad joke after all. How do you count all the pigs in China? Count the feet and divide by 4.
Thanks, John. Well, when we come back, we're heading back to Illinois to check out a classic 30 from Ferguson. Machinery Pete joins us next.
Hey folks, welcome back to Tractor Tales. Tag along with us now as we head to Arthur, Illinois to learn about a classic Ferguson 30.
Normal procedure, what I did was fix the clutch to be sure the oil leak stopped and all that good stuff. And it's been a pretty decent little tractor since we got that all done. And no major problem with it. Of course, we haven't worked it either. We just run up and down the road with it, so tractor drives and whatever. So one of my grandsons, he thought this would be a nice tractor for him. And I said, well, that's fine. You can drive it. And when we're done, well, you can have it. Well, he drove it 2 or 3 times, and that was it. He hadn't driven it since. So maybe he's just waiting. I don't know. This one was smaller than a 35. This tractor was built before the 35 came out. This was the biggest tractor they had. Then the 35 came out.
Thanks so much. Well, it's been nearly 2 months since a fire consumed a Tyson beef packing plant in Kansas. While the fire is gone, the impact on the market is still being felt. And now cattle groups are trying to strike change while the iron is still hot. That's our Farm Journal report next.
Closed captioning is brought to you by BASF. Grow smart with BASF. We create chemistry. U.S. Farm Report is produced and distributed by Farm Journal Broadcast. Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report. Trusted, timely, tradition.
Welcome back. Well, a fire that happened August 9th is still impacting the cattle markets. The fire at the Holcomb, Kansas Tyson plant sent some prices shooting higher while caused other prices to wane. And as the fire subsides, there's a major call for change. And that's this week's Farm Journal report. One fire with a big impact.
There's been lots of emotion and lots of adjustment in the market.
As the cattle industry tries to wrap its head around the fact one fire at one beef packing plant shook up the market the way it did.
From my perspective, it didn't reveal as much as some people think it does.
The fire at a Tyson beef processing plant in Holcomb, Kansas processes 6,000 head per day, which is roughly 6% of the total U.S. fed cattle capacity.
The boxed beef market shot up and then has quickly retreated back to previous levels or to where we would be this time of the year. So that effect is pretty much out of that market.
In the short term, this was adverse for margins at the feedlot level, so you can't ignore that. And likewise, in the short term, it was good for margins at the packing level. Certainly gross margins improved and most likely net margins with that, although we don't have cost data and so forth to get real precise on net margins. So that's a pretty obvious impact from this.
The fire and market reaction sparked controversy.
There was lots of uncertainty on how much beef was lost, how extensive the damage was, how long the plant will be closed, and we didn't answer those questions, in the hours. It took days and weeks after the event.
Some of the market impact still hasn't sizzled out.
Fed cattle market is probably the one that's still impacted the most. We've got a significant squeeze on packing capacity. We're pushing it near to the limits, and so that's making it a real challenge to keep moving these fed cattle through available supplies in a timely way. So it is recovering, but it's recovering relatively slow.
Purdue University's Jason Lusk says despite all the emotion, basic fundamentals originally drove prices.
When you reduce processing capacity, that reduces demand for cattle, drove down cattle prices. And then we had extra costs in the system because we had to bring in extra workers on Saturdays and conversions of plants that pushed up wholesale prices.
The market reaction was knee-jerk with wide swings creating anger. That's as cash cattle prices went lower.
Certainly we've seen some bouncing back since then. And I think we would expect that as more processing capacity is brought back on, we'll get back to something a little more normal.
The price pressure came as packers saw better margins.
Well, it certainly has influenced profitability in the short term for different sectors, and probably the most obvious two sectors are the packing sector and the feedlot sector.
That's creating anger among cattle producers with a new social media campaign push called #FairCattleMarkets.
This is a result of all of the anger in the countryside right now among cattle producers because of the market, because of the prices.
Newly named NCBA CEO Colin Woodall says NCBA has not participated in the online push for change for one main reason.
And the reason why is because this is being pushed by a group called the Organization for Competitive Markets, OCM. And OCM is actually connected to the Humane Society of the United States. So while the anger in the countryside is very real, the fact that OCM is involved does not mean that this is going to be good for cattle producers.
Woodall says NCBA is hearing cattle producers' frustrations, voices that he says were already being heard by the current administration.
And fortunately, that anger has been heard not only by us, but also by Secretary Perdue. And so Secretary Perdue has launched an investigation, and the whole goal of this investigation is to understand what transpired, what happened, and to actually give us some facts and analysis.
Woodall says the investigation launched will hopefully reveal some answers.
You want to know, was there collusion? Was there something going on in the marketplace that just wasn't right? There's a lot of, like I say, angry feelings about what transpired, but to date, we haven't received any definitive answers. And that's what ultimately we believe the USDA investigation will provide us.
Even when emotions are removed, the market reacted to the situation at hand.
There's a lot of uncertainty going into that day of the fire as well as the immediate aftermath. I'll remind most folks that actually the first week of August was a very volatile one in the stock market. And the reason that's relevant was there was a lot of uncertainty in the macroeconomic environment, and beef demand tends to be harmed when we have adverse development in the general economy, and therefore cattle prices get depressed.
As prices faded, there's also a renewed push to bring back mandatory country of origin labeling, something NCBA does not support.
Every time we see a dip in the market, folks bring back country of origin labeling and claim that if we had country of origin labeling, we wouldn't have this problem. And NCBA just does not believe that. And the reason why is because COOL was a mandatory government-run program, and it was the law of the land for 6.5 years. And there is not a credible economist out there who will point to COOL and say that it was beneficial to cattle producers or our industry.
As the market fuel from the fire subsides and equilibrium sets in, Peel thinks prices will continue to trend lower.
But eventually, I suspect the fall run will pressure prices. With wheat pasture demand good, we actually may see sideways to slightly stronger prices here for another 2 or 3 weeks before we get into bigger numbers of cattle.
That's as economists hope new trade deals with countries like Japan will create needed demand. Well, joining me now is editor of Drovers, Greg Henderson. And Greg, there was a big meeting this week, a rally of cattle ranchers in Omaha, and really a call for change. What's fueling that? What does the cattle industry want to see changed?
So the rally was sponsored by the Organization for Competitive Markets. Generally, these are people who are upset with the markets and the way the markets have performed since the fire at Tyson in August. Cattle ranchers are losing a lot of money based on what has happened, and so they are upset. They want President Trump to take some action.
But the anger from some of these cattle producers, is it towards these 4 major beef packing plants, or is it towards the U.S. administration right now?
Well, absolutely, it is targeted toward the big 4 meat packers. They want those big 4 broken up because the 4 of them represent 82% of all the cattle slaughtered in this country right now.
Well, when you watch cattle prices drop, you understand cattle producers' frustration, right? You understand why emotions are high when you see them losing money, yet packers making money. But when you look at the economics of it, it seems like after the fire, from what those economists said, this is just, it was basic economics. It was the fundamentals of the market.
Right. It is hard to take when you're losing $200 a head and packers are making $400 a head. But it looks, from what the economists tell me, as you say, it looks like markets did what markets do. And markets do not like uncertainty. Certainly we saw that in the futures market. And the trade is based on the fact that they just don't like uncertainty. And it's, that supply and demand drove the market.
Right, as we heard. All right, well, definitely a lawsuit that we'll be watching as it plays out. Greg, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
We need to take a quick break, and then our analysts rejoin us for a marketing discussion this week. Here now with Brian Bastine and Alan Brugler again for our marketing roundtables this week. Brian, we're seeing China come to the market, buy a little bit of soybeans. Is it enough to impress the market at this point?
Every little bit helps, Tyne, at this point. However, the volumes yet have fallen a little bit shorter some of the trade expectations earlier. However, we don't know as we approach the proposed talks here in October if we might see some more. But every bit helps. We're still not seeing anything near the levels, though, however, if you will, back in the heyday of Chinese buying.
Yeah, so if we don't see China resume to those levels, but we do see them buying little by little, as really they don't have a lot of options right now in South America. And we see yield reduced a little bit. Does that change the story for soybeans much?
Well, the combination of those factors and this reduction in the carryover stocks that we got on Monday does tighten up the scenario. Our cash average price estimate went up about 15 cents a bushel just from the stocks change. And if we lower the yield another bushel or two, then the cash price goes up some more. To really get to a $9 cash average price, USDA average for the year, you'd have to have the yield go down below 44.5 bushels, and that's a stretch. But to get 870 or 875 rather than USDA's figure is pretty easy at this point, and that would allow futures to go comfortably into the high nines sometime during the year.
Okay, but it sounds like you can't get uber bullish at this point.
At this point, when you look at the balance sheet, we are seeing the carryout projected for 1920 on beans come down, but by no means at today, here in early October, is it tight. So we have to see some changes to really see a dramatic change in that environment.
Are you expecting to see a large increase in acres in South America this year, Brian?
Every indication at this point is expansion in acreage is being seen tying from a year ago, and now in the wake of this September stock surprise, that would only give them a little bit more incentive to do that. So I would say yes, significant. Quantifying that, 3 to 5% might be a little aggressive on the upside, but 2 to 4% certainly is possible.
Alan, you agree with that?
We're definitely seeing the private estimates go up. 123 million tons, 124 million tons is floating around out there versus 117 last year. I'm talking about Brazil here. That's a combination of assuming good yields and increased acreage, but we have to remember they also increase first crop corn acreage, and so that does limit the expansion in soybeans a little bit.
All right, let's get into pork a little bit. This week, Rabobank saying they think that Chinese hog herd has been reduced by 55%. We heard from John Phipps saying, listen, these numbers, it's really hard to peg how many hogs we have lost in China right now. But 55% herd reduction, you would assume that would be good news for pork, and has pork prices kind of responded to that?
Well, Chinese pork prices have responded. They're 60 to 70% higher than they were a year ago. We think part of that's deliberate, though. The Chinese government's sending a signal to the Chinese farmer, okay, you had to liquidate your herd, your barns are empty, we want you to take a chance and go ahead and replace those hogs, even though we don't have a vaccine for ASF. So they're somewhat limiting their imports from the U.S. because they're trying to keep that domestic price up and give their rebuild efforts a chance to succeed.
Well, if we do have a 55% herd reduction in China, not good news for soybean demand, right? So, Brian, where could we maybe see soybean demand come from? Where do we need to see it come from in order to really not feel the brunt of ASF from a demand standpoint?
Some of the other areas in the Asian area, if you will, are still growing in terms of the protein consumption. So there's some opportunity for some growth there. But to this point, when you remove that type of volume of meal consumption in China that you just talked about, you can't replace all that immediately. That's just that quick of a change. So from the standpoint, yes, there is some growth in some other areas, but not to that magnitude to replace if it's that high.
All right. Thank you both for joining us this weekend. We appreciate it. Stay with us. We'll have much more on U.S. Farm Report when we come back.
I'm Justin Moore. Welcome to Outdoors on the Farm, brought to you by my friends at Roxor. From muddy trails to dusty work sites to hidden hunting spots, nothing gets you through it like a rugged Roxor. It's a side-by-side unlike any other.
Outdoors on the farm, where I was born, I was raised, and I'll do whatever it takes to stay. Outdoors on the farm.
Well, we're bringing back a popular series this year. It's called Outdoors on the Farm. And while hunting is a major part of it, it's also grooming and taking care of the land around you. Chip Flory takes us this week to discover some wetlands in this week's Outdoors on the Farm.
Welcome back to Outdoors on the Farm, everybody. I'm your host, Chip Flory. I've got Tim Recker. We're in Arlington, Iowa, and we're looking over. It looks like a spot that was just kind of carved out of a cornfield when you get right down to it, Tim, because it's doggone wet in there, isn't it?
It's really wet. We've had 6 inches of rain this week. This farm was the wettest farm in Fayette County when I bought it in 2013.
Yeah.
And in about another 2 months, we're going to transform this thing into a crepe wetland.
Very cool. Let's talk a little bit more about the history of this, because this wetland area really kind of picked itself, didn't it?
Exactly. There's 750 acres of every direction you see
Yeah.
comes to this location.
Gotcha.
So it's a perfect location to put a wetland in. 750 acres of ground. There's going to be 8 acres of water on this. This thing was solid trees when I purchased
Trees,
it.
willows, everything.
Wetland, willows, the whole works. And in 2013, we had this rain that lasted all year long, prevent plant. It allowed me the first year to improve this farm.
Yep.
Get it tiled, get a bulletproof tile system in. We couldn't really do anything to this piece, so I've had to kind of just leave it alone, and knowing that there's better things coming for this chunk of ground.
Right, right. And the better things coming is, like we said, when a wetland identifies itself, you start looking for the opportunities to put it in. But the 750 acres, is that kind of a minimum for a CREP wetland?
500 to 1,500 acres is a good size. They want to have about 1% water to the land mass. So 750 acres, I'm going to have 8 acres of water. I'm a little bit over 1%. So what this thing is going to do, when we have big rains here, and we've had some big rains, we go over the road. We flood for a short period of time, goes over the road. What we're going to create is this big bathtub.
Nice.
And then it's going to expand.
Yep.
It's going to have a bounce of 2 feet so that we don't send all the water down it in a short period of time. We're going to allow that water the sediments to come out.
Yep.
Denitrify.
Yep.
Slow it down and just let nature do its thing. So it's a natural. This is a natural location because it's just a big bowl in here.
I mean, we're checking a lot of the boxes here, Tim, with this. We've got the nitrate runoffs that we're trying to control, water quality issues. It's everything that this wetland is supposed to be doing, it's going to be doing. All right, we are with Tim Recker. In the next episode of Outdoors on the Farm, we're going to be talking about the development of this wetland, how we're going to pay for it. There's some CREP dollars that we can use and some cost share. We're going to talk about that in the next episode of Outdoors on the Farm.
Thanks, Chip. What a fun series. I can't wait to check it out as you make some more trips this year. All right, when we come back, customer support with John Phipps.
Hey y'all, Justin Moore here. Get ready to kick up some dust with the Roxor Dirt Roads and a Country Show sweepstakes. Enter now for a chance to win a customized off-road Roxor and 2 VIP tickets to one of my upcoming concerts. Visit roxoroffroad.com/Justin Moore.
Your call is very important to us. Please hold.
Well, customer support gets pretty technical this week, tackling the topic of fuel cells. John Phipps joins us again from the farm.
Longtime viewer Gregory Clifford has a question about an idea I thought was going to be a big winner years ago. Maybe you'd comment instead about the chances of companies like Fuel Cell Energy Incorporated and others in providing a steady stream of supply-demand for farm products in the green energy businesses. If even rotten crops can feed biogas fuel cells for clean energy output, wouldn't that fuel the growing auto-electric market here too? Greg, fuel cells are one of those ideas that really look good on paper, but they get chewed up in the details. Fuel cells came to my attention as a young boy during the space race because they were used for power in various space vehicles. For those unfamiliar with the concept, fuel cells generate electricity from hydrogen and oxygen or other hydrocarbon fuels like natural gas by chemical processes called redox reactions. Hard to explain, but the innovative part is there are no moving parts needed, it's just chemistry. As a youngster, I remember seeing imagined power plants hooked up to propane tanks supplying steady energy and heat for a farm. As you suggested, digesters could also produce the same fuel from manure or crop waste. But like many simple ideas, the devil's in the details. One big one is most fuel cells operate at very high temperatures, which is great in the winter, but otherwise something you have to deal with in the summer. The second is, like many alternative power sources, it really needs to be much bigger than one farm to be economical. The company you mentioned sells fuel cell coal generators suitable for large hospitals or factories or even neighborhoods. Fuel cells simply don't scale down to farm size well. But the biggest challenge for fuel cell technology is competing energy sources, solar, photovoltaic, and wind. The price per unit of energy for these technologies has fallen below all other existing sources, even existing coal plants. While fuel cells could work, the economics make it unlikely they will be a significant factor anytime soon.
Thanks, John. Well, we talked about it earlier, from heat to flooding. More wild weather this week we'll show you in From the Farm next. Welcome back. Well, to end the show, the weather impacting many farmers this year. Montana's governor declaring a state of emergency earlier this week for areas hit by an early season snowstorm. An early season snowstorm bringing heavy and wet snow with high winds, but the brunt of the storm hit Montana, where up to 2 feet of snow fell Saturday in the mountains, and a record 14 inches fell in Great Falls. And all of that snow will melt and pour into a major reservoir in South Dakota. That reservoir already full, causing flooding this year, and the flooding is far from over for areas of Missouri. Just look at this video shot by Mitch Adams. The Norfolk Southern Railroad bridge over the Grand River in Brunswick, Missouri, swept away by raging water and debris pushing up against it. A large area of the plains in the upper Midwest saw several inches of rain this week alone. All right, and next week we're hitting the road again for our 2019 AgriTalk U.S. Farm Report College Roadshow. Next week, we invite you to join us from Mizzou. Well, that does it for this week on U.S. Farm Report. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to join us again next week as we work to build on our tradition. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Closed captioning is brought to you by BASF. Grow smart with BASF. We create chemistry. U.S. Farm Report is produced and distributed by Farm Journal Broadcast.